I know you're gonna dig this.
This is Rhine McLin, host of the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center's award-winning show, Funk Chronicles, recorded live here at the DATV Studios in Dayton, Ohio. Zooming in all the way from New York City, Onnie McIntyre, guitarist and original member of the funk group AWB, Average White Band. Welcome and thank you for agreeing to come on our show.
My pleasure.
This is so interesting because, first of all, Onnie, you are born in England.
Yeah.
Well, you're from the country of the United Kingdom, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you hooked up with all these Scottish guys.
Oh, yeah. Scotland is where I'm from. It's slightly different from England.
And then you all come up with this name, Average White Band, which everybody knew you by AWB. Now, I just need to know the history of how all of this happened. And where did you all come up with this name? How did you all meet? Tell me about, I want to know it all about the Average White Band, AWB. That's what everybody, I mean, that's, if you say AWB, everybody know we're talking about the Average White Band with an English-Scottish background. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were, funnily enough, the individuals that became part of Average White Band were from different parts of Scotland. So there was only two or three of us knew each other actually in Scotland, but in those days you had to travel to London. London was the only city in the United Kingdom that had where record companies hang out. It was the only place you could get signed. And if you look back at the history, the Beatles moved from Liverpool to London to get a record deal. The only way you could get a record contract in those days in the 60s and the early 70s was to go to London. So individually, we traveled to London and then met up in London because mainly through gigs, if there was a concert on, say, the best example is Al Green came to London in the early 70s. And although we didn't know each other, one or two of us knew each other, and we would meet up. We would get introduced to each other, and so everyone loved Al Green was a huge favorite of ours, and everybody that we knew. But we were growing up in Scotland. We had a lot. Soul music was very popular because it was more dance oriented than English music. The English musicians tended to go towards blues. Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, and most of the artists, the English artists, were drawn to Chicago blues, but we liked the tougher stuff, the more R&B artists like James Brown. I mean, I heard when I just left school, and some of my schoolmates were still at school, and I went round to a friend's house, and he had, borrowed his uncle's album, and it was James Brown, Live at the Apollo.
Oh my!
Thank you, and thank you very kind.
And he played that to me, and I've never been the same since. I'd never anything like it because we weren't getting records like that. You know, we got some records, but nothing like that. I don't know how he got it. I think maybe he had a friend who was in the Merchant Seaman and brought it back from New York or something, but I'd never heard anything like it. So I went out and I ordered it from the States. And this is the actual copy. But I lent it to a friend in 1966. and he held on to it. And I didn't get it back until about 1985, maybe.
He really liked
it. And look at the state of it. I mean, it's all battered but it still plays, and I've got this in my wall. I mean, this is where I really started in soul music. It was right there. Before that, I was into instrumental stuff and the Ventures and very middle of the road kind of stuff. The Shadows and Cliff Richard were British artists. But we discovered then that British artists were doing copies of American soul records. So the British versions weren't nearly as good as the American ones. So we said, well, let's hear the real one. So we go into our local record store and they would play. Oh, this is a track by the Stones, and then we would see underneath it was written by somebody called Marvin Gaye. I said, well, let's hear his version. And of course, Marvin Gaye's version of Can I Get a Witness is a lot different from the Rolling Stones version, I can tell you. So we went, I like that one. So what more have you got? And I said, well, we've just got his new single, Ain't That Peculiar? So we immediately bought that and bought every album or every single that he put out after that, pretty much. And then it was the same with everyone. Obviously, every time James Brown came out with a record, I personally bought that. My friends bought it. But none of them were to do with the band. But everyone did that individually. The horn players in the band were more interested in the jazzier side of rhythm and blues, like Cannonball Adderley. Obviously, James Brown had horns. The more jazz side of it, like John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, Miles, of course, was huge with them. And so after we met, they introduced me to a lot of jazz, the jazz side of rhythm and blues, which, of which there was a lot at that time. The Jazz Crusaders became the Crusaders because they discovered that it was more financially better to play middle of rhythm and blues and jazz rather than straight ahead jazz. So the timing for us was very good because it was just a lot of the jazz artists were changing over to R&B. Cannonball Adderley had come out with Mercy Mercy with an Austrian piano player called Joe Zawinul, who became a leader of Weather Report. And he recruited Wayne Shorter on horn, so it was really Zawinul and Wayne Shorter that formed Weather Report. But they were grown up and brought up in jazz, but because the Cannonball had gone more rhythm and blues, the Country Preacher is a great album, which was written by Joe Zawinul, and as was Mercy Mercy. So everyone was playing a more R&B stuff, which suited us. So the early version of AWB was more into a slightly more jazzier side of rhythm and blues. So I think that really helped us, with material.
So, but how old were you when you first discovered that you were interested in music, and you moved from where you were to knowing that you had to go to London to at least get an audience for music that you really liked? So, but how old were you when you all started like at this?
Well, I'd already started playing because my mother played. It was a kind of musical family, although I was the only child. But I had uncles that sang opera and, La Boheme and Puccini and all that highbrow stuff. My mother played piano, but she played quite a variety of music. She played a lot of country dance music. Scottish country dance music is very danceable. It's all about dance, and it's all 4 to the floor, and it's very strict time. So there's a lot of similarities between Scottish dance music and rhythm and blues. In fact, traditional Scottish music uses a flat 7. The 7th note of the degree of the scale, degree of scale, is flattened, the same as R&B, same as blues. So there was an affinity there. So I think something clicked when we heard James Brown and rhythm and blues. But we didn't always play. I mean, individually, I played all sorts of stuff, but mostly kind of instrumental guitar stuff, the Ventures and people like that. But a friend of mine, I was telling you earlier, brought in a copy of James Brown live at the Apollo, which I'll show you again. I mean, look at this photograph on the back, with James Brown. I mean, we thought, who is this guy? And then, of course, when he played the record, I'd never heard anything like it. It was the most exciting thing I'd ever heard. So that changed my life right there. That was right there. That I started getting into R&B then. But I noticed that the other guys, if you asked any of the other guys, the members of Average White Band, they had moments like that as well, where they discovered American rhythm and blues, which is an American art form. And we were just dedicated to everything that we could. We bought everything we could. You would save up your wages. You'd be working all week, and on Friday you get your wage packet and immediately go to the record store and buy whatever we could afford. If it was Ike and Tina Turner, I bought James Brown, obviously, Marvin Gaye, and Junior Walker, most of the Motown acts we bought and learned the songs. So, but rhythm and blues music was in the crowds that we played to were very much into rhythm and blues because it was really easy to dance to. So we played mostly dance clubs, which played rhythm and blues. So you had to know all the songs in order to get a gig in a band. I played guitar, so we need a guitar player. Do you know Isley Brothers? Do you know? And they would just rhyme off the songs that we played. And
the Isley Brothers are from Ohio. The original Isley Brothers are from Ohio, and
that's great.
Yeah,
Ronald is one of my favorite singers ever, rhythm and blues, and he's still up there. I mean, I haven't heard that many. There was in the women's side, obviously you had Aretha and Shaka, guys. Ronald Isley had been singing so long that his voice is just. We were huge fans of the Isley Brothers as well, as most people that we hung out with in Scotland. We hung out. There was an almost all night club in Glasgow, where I'm from, in Scotland. And it was open till 4 a.m. every weeknight, apart from Sunday. At the weekends, it was open till at least 5 on a Saturday, Sunday morning. I think it was closed on Sunday, but the rest of the week it was open till 4 a.m. So the DJs were getting records straight from Memphis or from Philadelphia or from Detroit, and they were playing up-to-date R&B records. So we would hear them at the club, and then you would go home and learn them. You get the record and go home and learn it. And then every band you played in was trying to outdo each other on who could come up with the latest Otis Redding song. It's so exciting music.
So with all of this music going on, how did the Average White Band come together?
Well, as I was saying earlier on, we realised we had to go to London, and a friend of mine and I were in a band in Scotland, but they weren't going to go anywhere. The guys that ran the band had good jobs and, with pensions and all that. And we were, at 20 years old, you're not really interested in you don't see ahead of, the next couple of years. So we thought, I had done an apprenticeship. My parents wanted me to become have an apprenticeship being an electrician. And I got an offer to go to London. A band was going down to London and they asked me to join. And I only had 6 months to do as an apprentice. And I said, well, I would love to come, but I can't. I've got to finish my apprenticeship first. And that was really, to please my parents, because they were so worried if I'd taken up music that there was nothing to fall back on. So I finished the apprenticeship, and basically as soon as I finished, I left and got in the van and drove to London, which is about maybe 6 or 7 hour drive in a van with a bunch of guys. And it was brilliant. I'd never been to London before. And everything was a huge adventure, you know, so through that and through, you know, every member of the Average White Band turning up at the same shows every other week, depending on who was on. As I say, the first time I was conscious of it was Al Green was in town, and everybody turned up, and we said, oh yeah, I remember you from, you know. So you reintroduced them and say, well, you want to go for a pint afterwards? And everybody would go to the pub and have a couple of pints, and we would start talking about music, and then we would hang out together, and we'd say, well, look, we keep meeting up like this, why don't we form a band? And it was everybody, yeah, you know, there's no market for it. Well, there wasn't, in London at that time, there wasn't a market for rhythm and blues. David Bowie had come out with the Spiders from Mars and Iggy Pop and all that stuff, and you were going, God, I don't fancy, you got to dress up and put makeup on. And we were going, nah, I don't fancy that, because we were all, you know, kind of Scottish guys. We weren't into that stuff at all. We were into good, solid music. So we thought, oh, well, we've nothing else to do. We've tried everything else, so why not we just do this? And we formed the band with the guys that we had. Everyone was into R&B, soul music, and jazz, the funkier side of jazz. So I said, let's put a band together, and we did a demo. And Alan and I had known each other, had met each other in London. We were hanging out, and we lived next door to each other in the same dehevelled part of London, apartments. And so we decided to form. We weren't getting anywhere. We were starving, basically. And we needed a gig, so we decided to try and form the band. So the first thing we did was try and get someone with financial backing. Unfortunately, we found someone who was good at getting money, people to invest, you know, in new projects. And this fellow was a film actor called Stanley Baker. And he had a company, and he needed to, I think for tax reasons, he needed to get rid of some money. So he invested in our band. And then he invested in festivals, and he put on a festival in Lincolnshire, which was set up for about June, but they had to go to press to advertise it, and we didn't have a name. You know, we couldn't think of anything, and a friend of ours who was a diplomat, another Scottish friend, who was a friend of Molly, the horn player. In fact, Molly was sleeping in his floor. And the apartment was so tiny that when you opened the door, if he put his bed down at night, you couldn't open the door to get out. You know, we're talking small. So he was posted out to Thailand or someplace. But he was one of these guys who had a great phrase for everything. You know, he was full of phrases and sayings, and so was Molly, our tenor player. And he said, you know, last man through, shut the gate. Will you take a check? The more you spend, the bigger the dividend. He had all these phrases that came out. And another one was, if something was too out there, he was into really weird avant-garde jazz, you know, really way out stuff. I didn't understand it. He said, oh man, it's too much for the average white man. You know, and he was listening to African music and all sorts of stuff. And he was saying, oh, you can't, you know, it's really too much for the average white man. But we knew we were white. Scotland, but we loved black music. So at the time, Monty Python, I don't know if you know, John Cleese, there's a comedy program that had just come out called Monty Python's Flying Circus. And the humor was very out there. It was too much for the average white man, actually. But it could have tied in, because we were a white band playing black music, it tied in with the subtle idea of, you know, there's a humor in that, saying that you are something when you're not, or you're not something but you are. It's one of those kind of things. A white band playing rhythm and blues music was not something that was very common, certainly not in Britain. So said, well, we need, we've got to go to press, so we need a name. Give us a name now. So somebody said, well, the Average White Band. And yeah, that'll do. And we wrote it down. And that was it. And of course, then it was up in print, and we couldn't do anything about it. It was, we had a name, and people thought it was really quirky. They thought, where do you get a name like that, And then when they heard the band play, they go, now I get it, Because we were doing James Brown covers and Isley Brothers songs, and, and Cannonball Adderley, we did Walk Tall, for example, which is a Cannonball Adderley instrumental, so, and we love people like Albert King, the bluesier side of R&B, but we liked Albert King because he was the Stax. He's a really good, solid rhythm section behind him, it was like Booker T and the MGs, which was actually half black, half white, because Booker T and Al Jackson were black, and Donald Duck Dunn, the bass player, and then of course Steve Cropper on Telecaster guitar. So it was a good mixture. So we identified with that, and we just loved the music, So that became the name. We were stuck with it, and people liked it because it was, how can you, and it was wow, I remember we used to go to all the clubs in London, and someone was playing an African act that we wanted to see. It was an African club, which was in Hampstead, which is actually a really kind of upmarket part of London. And there's this club, and once the act had finished, the African guys, they said, well, next week we've got a band called the Average White Band. And it was a sudden silence. And a few people laughed, we were in the corner going, but once they heard them, a lot of people turned up at, next week when we were playing there, and they loved the music, and then more and more people started coming. So, and it was mostly a black crowd we got, which is, was really encouraging, I got to say. But, everyone got the music. If you like music, well played and in time, and at that time different from what everyone else was doing, then they really liked it, because up until that time, people were, still in the kind of 60s hippie stage, and smoking and sitting cross-legged on the floor with long hair, nodding and that sort of stuff. Our crowd went to the bar. So clubs loved us because we sold lots of drink at the bar, because they would all, drinking Scotch band, drinking Scotch and dancing. So we helped to get this dance scene back. And of course, a lot of people loved that. So we get good crowds wherever we went. That was basically how we really broke in London.
So how did you get to the States? Because you really took off in the States.
Yeah, we did. We were signed. First of all, the biggest show we had done was in 1974. Eric Clapton had been overdosing on heroin. He was really in a mess, and Pete Townsend from The Who really got him together and put him on a recovery course, and gave him a show. Said, look, if you can pull yourself together, I'm going to put on a show, and I'm going to play with you, and I'm going to put a band around you. And so he did. And the show was at the Rainbow Theatre in London. And this was Eric's first show for maybe 2 or 3 years, where he'd been out of the picture, out of everywhere, basically. Our manager had worked with Robert Stigwood organisation, who was Clapton's manager and record company. And he basically put the money together for Eric to do this. But our manager, the guy who had put the band, had got the finance together for the band in order for the band to start, had worked with Eric. So he knew Eric and Pete, and he said, well, I want to put my band on. So because it was Eric Clapton, everyone was in London. It was anyone in London was at that show. And we opened the show for Eric. So people go, wow, who's this band? So that really got our name about. And I mean, about a week after we did that show and everybody was talking about it, we got good write-ups. All the newspapers, all the music press were covering Eric's comeback. And of course, as we're on the same bill, we got coverage in all the papers. So about a week later, we got a call from MCA Records and they said, we want to sign you guys. Have you got any material? Well, the guys had been writing songs, so we had enough material for an album. So they immediately put us in the studio. So we recorded an album and it came out. It didn't really do that well. It didn't really get promoted that well. We had a cult following in London and a few soul clubs that were dotted around. You know, there was a northern soul scene up in Manchester, Birmingham. There was soul clubs around the country, dotted all over the place, but not enough to make a dent on the charts. So it didn't really do very much as far as sales went, although everyone that we knew bought the album, and it was it was an undercurrent thing, you know. It was a hip thing to get, but it didn't translate into national sales. So we said, well, we've always wanted to go to America, and America's where all our heroes are. All the guys that we followed were all rhythm and blues artists, Marvin, Cannonball, James Brown, everybody was in the States. So we said, well, why don't we just go to the States and see what we can do for the next album? So our manager, our tour manager, had worked with Eric Clapton, as I said, and he arranged it and hooked us up with Bonnie Bramlett. The Bonnie Bramlett, Clapton had been playing with Bonnie and Delaney and Bonnie, and they loved soul music, and they did a lot of soul covers, and they were friendly with all sorts of artists like Sly and Freddie Stone. And so they said, well, come over and stay at our place, and they fixed us up with places to live, and we were all doubled up in a house. It's up near the fault line in LA, you know. We wondered why nobody lived there much, but it was right on the fault line. St. Andrew's Fault, I think, went right through our house. But anyway, every time the floor rattled, we would go, oh, is that an earthquake? But we rehearsed there, and then we got studio time, and we went and recorded an album. And that became, where are my albums here? Excuse me a second. That became this album, which that was actually released after the White Album came out. This didn't do anything either in the States. But so what happened was that we went to MCA and they said, well, what do you think of the album? And they said, well, not much. But we were signed to MCA UK, not MCA US. So we went to the head office, you know, in the Studio City and out in the valley, and they said, well, who are you guys? They didn't understand what we were doing. They didn't understand what we were trying to do, because at that time they were mostly a country and western label. So so we said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, we said, we need money to finish the album. We need, you know, I forget how much it was, 20 grand or something. And they said, oh, no, we were not giving you that. So we left, and then we were kind of down in the dumps, and then our manager, who had been with Clapton, called a friend of his who was a fellow called Alan Pariser, who managed Delaney and Bonnie. And we decided we wanted to go on Atlantic Records. Most of the records that we'd heard that we liked, you know, Aretha was on Atlantic, Sam and Dave were on a subsidiary of Atlantic, you know, Otis Redding was on a subsidiary. We said, well, that's the record label we want to go to. So we said, well, he knows Jerry Wexler because Delaney and Bonnie were signed to Atlantic. So we called up the guy and Alan Pariser, and I said, do you know how we want to get in touch with Jerry Wexler? And he said, oh, he's here. I said, what do you mean he's here? He said, well, he's staying at my place. We're having a party tonight. Why don't you come over? So we had the tapes of the album that we just finished. So I think 4 of us, but I didn't go. I decided not to go. I thought it would be better if there was only 2 or 3 people, so that it wouldn't be too much, it wouldn't get confusing. So 3 of the guys and their manager went over, and they joined the party, and they met, you know, Graham Nash was there, and Donovan, a whole bunch of people. You know, so we knew some of the people, and then Alan Parisa said, well, this is Jerry Wexler, and we said, well, we've got a tape, so why don't you listen to it? So we stuck it on in the middle of the party. I mean, we were desperate. And he was like, this is great, I love this stuff. You know, where are you guys been? Blah, 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 blah. He says, I'm going to sign you. And he basically, he didn't sign us that night or the next day, but we met him the next day, and he said, I'm going to sign you, and I want you to fly to Criteria Studios and redo 2 new songs for the album. The tape that I heard, and I want to hear 2 new songs. So, okay. So they put us on a flight. We were in LA, flew us to Miami, and we recorded 2 new tracks. And then they said, well, wait a minute, these sound so much better than the tracks that you've got. There's going to be too big a difference between how good these are compared to what you've done. You mean the sound quality? I mean, it wasn't the material, but it was really the sound quality. So he said, I'm going to put you with Arif Mardin. Because we thought Jerry was going to produce it. But he said, no, I'm busy just now, but I think I've got the guy for you. It's Arif Mardin, who we knew about. He'd worked with the Rascals. It was actually a Long Island band that were, you know, that was tough, you know, and we knew their stuff, and obviously we knew Aretha, and he'd done arrangements for Aretha and Donny Hathaway and the like. So he was there, and I got to tell you that we went into the studio. Arif called up. We were staying in a hotel close by the studio, and we were due to go into the session at 7 o'clock or something like that night, and then you would just work through the night basically. About 4:30, he said, I want you to come over early because Aretha's just finishing up her album. Okay. So we went over to Criteria Studios, and we walked in there, and there was Tom Dowd, famous engineer, Jerry Wexler and Arif Mardin sitting behind the desk, the 3 of them. And Jerry Wexler's got on shorts. They were all dressed like, you know, for warm weather, shorts and baggy shorts and everything, T-shirts. And then we looked into the studio, and here's Aretha sitting at the piano. And Cornell Dupree, all our heroes were on, you know, the rhythm section. Cornell Dupree, Richard T on organ. The drummer was Bernard Purdy. I mean, who'd been listening to for years, and it was just amazing. You know, I mean, just everybody's jaw dropped, and we tried to take photographs, but we were shaking. You know? So they finished up the session with, you know, it was something to see. And then Arif came over, and he just said he had a wink in his eye, and he just said, "Next." We're going. And Alan sat down in the seat that the bass player, whose name I've forgotten right now, sat down, and the seat was still warm where he'd been sitting. And we started our album. I mean, it was as quick as that. And then we ran through it, and they said, well, why don't you do this? And why don't we try that? And then Arif would make suggestions, and they would change the arrangement a little bit, just as we were going. And they put down, the first track we put down was Person to Person, which is on the White album, which I'll get now. This is the one with, I don't know if you can see it there.
I can see, yes.
With the lady's bottom.
Yes.
And you won't believe the photograph on the back, you would not recognise any of these guys with the long hair. We were 20-something years old, so we were relatively young. But we recorded 2 or 3 tracks. You Got It was one that they wrote, and we recorded Person to Person was the other. We overdubbed that with parts to do that. And Nothing You Can Do was the... I'm sorry, You Got It was the first one we did. And we did person to person while we were there, and Nothing You Can Do, I believe. Anyway, that was the start of the White album, and the tracks sounded so much better once we'd finished them than the previous tracks. So Jerry Wexler came in and he said, and he had the papers for us to sign, so we signed the contract to Atlantic, and he said, we're going to, because the sound difference is too great, we want to re-record the other songs that you have, and we'll make an album out of that. So we kept the songs that we'd done for MCA, but we re-recorded, and he says, I'm going to fly you up to New York, and we're going to re-record them in Atlantic. Now, Atlantic Studios were famous for the drum sound, and Robbie McIntyre had a monster drum sound. I mean, he's a monster player, and they felt that Gene Paul was the right engineer for him, as well as the sound that they would get in that studio. They knew the sound backwards, and they felt that was appropriate. And anyway, Criteria were booked up after that. We were only booked to do 2 or 3 tracks, so they didn't have any time, but they had free time at Atlantic in New York. So we flew up to Atlantic and re-recorded all the other material and got the album out of it, and that became the White Album, as we call it, or AWB, as you can see. So, but latterly we had come up, Roger and Hamish had come up with an instrumental. We always did an instrumental. Every album we've always done at least one instrumental, because a lot of people thought we were an instrumental band when they heard Pick Up the Pieces. So we re-recorded Pick Up the Pieces, but Arif had some different ideas for it, and he decided that there was a chant, pick up the pieces, pick up the pieces. We didn't do it until the very end of the song, and he said, you want to bring that forward? And then Jerry came out and he said, I want to reintroduce the bass to the drummer, and he came up with a really simple bass part. So they helped to arrange it and put it together the way they wanted it, the way an Atlantic act would. So we re-recorded Pick Up the Pieces. But funnily enough, that wasn't the first single. They put out Nothing You Can Do, I believe, is the first single. And then Pick Up the Pieces. What happened was when Atlantic sent out the song, the sampler songs to the DJs, they sent them out to DJs first, whatever the DJs liked, they would play on the program. So the first program that picked up was really in Seattle. They picked up on Pick Up the Pieces as a track to play. Then the dance clubs started playing it, because they realized when they played the intro guitar part with the stab horns, as soon as they played that, people got up and started dancing on the floor as soon as they heard that intro. So the DJs started playing it, so it became like a dance hit in all the clubs. So and then the clubs started promoting it, and then the DJs that were on radio started promoting it, because they'd been to the clubs the night before and they liked the song because they danced to it, and that's why it became so popular, and then it became a crossover hit. By that time, the album was ready to be released, and that helped, because of the Pick Up the Pieces, that helped to sell the album. So we had a #1 album and a #1 single in the Cashbox and Billboard charts. February 1975. So that's when everything changed.
You were nominated for a Grammy in 1975, correct?
We were, yeah. And we didn't know. We were still getting used to being in America. We didn't really know how much the money was. $100, that sounds all right. You would go out and buy an expensive meal, and you'd realize it was, when you translated it into British money, it was a lot of money. But we didn't know. We didn't really know the value of, things were very different. So anyway, we were nominated, and Arif decided that we would get together before the award show, which was, at that time, Grammys were held in New York. And we decided to go to to the show, but we decided to get together first. So we all get dressed up in dicky bows and tuxedos and everything, and the wives were there in the long dresses, and then about halfway through the show, all these people got up and started leaving, and we go, well, where are they going? And they were going to get their awards. They'd been told that they'd won, so they should go to a different theatre across the street. But we didn't go, so we knew we hadn't won. And it went to MFSB, which was, getting a lot of play on Soul Train at that time. I think there was also some politics involved. I'm not sure if I should say that or not, but it would have been a bit much for a white band to win R&B, Grammy of the Year for the best instrumental. I mean, I think it was a bit much. I mean, we were happy where we are. It didn't just being nominated was enough, and that was great. And so Arif lived up on the west side, and he said, well, let's go. I tell you what, we're going to go back to my place. And he called his wife Latifah, and who organised the staff. It was a place that was kind of upstairs and downstairs. They had staff. A man and his wife who looked after the property and stuff. And we all arrived back at the house, and Latifah said, well, we've got to be able to cook something for the guys. And the fellow said, but madame, there is only rice. We only have rice. So she said, then cook it. So she cooked all this rice, put some curry in it, and we had a great night. And all sorts of people. Aretha turned up with her family, and just all these celebrities turned up from the Grammy show, and it was quite a night. I vaguely remember leaving. People were saying goodnight to the lamp standards, and somebody set their shirt on fire. I mean, it was a wild night.
I can't imagine. One of the things I want to do is go over the original members of the Average White Band, and let's start with Alan Gorey.
Alan Gorey and I had been in two bands before Average White Band started. Him and I, as I said, we met up in London because the band that he was with were living next door. There was a really cheap part of London to live for. It was about, I don't know, $2 a week to play. So basically, he was the one. Alan was the one who knew everyone. He was like the common denominator, and he was the one who brought everyone together. So he decided he always wanted to have a band with the people he'd worked with when he was at home in Scotland. And he'd worked with Molly Duncan and Roger Ball, who were the sax players. So he brought them in as the horn players for the band. Robbie McIntosh was the drummer, a young drummer from Dundee, which is where Alan met Molly and Roger. He was at college there in school in Dundee. And Robbie was a young drummer, a phenomenal drummer that, who was coming up. And so he pulled him in. Him and I had worked together for years. So we formed the band around that. And then a little bit later on, about 6 months after we'd formed, we had a trumpet player, and it wasn't really working out with the trumpet. Alan felt he didn't want to be the only vocalist. He always wanted to sing with someone else. So he pulled in Hamish Stewart, who I had worked with in Glasgow. So that was the members, Alan Gorey, myself, Robbie McIntosh, Molly Duncan, Roger Ball, Hamish Stewart was the original band. And that was that recorded the first album and recorded AWB, which was the big hit.
And I know that, let's talk about the song Schoolboy Crush. Is it Schoolboy Crush? Is that the name of it? The song?
Yeah, Schoolboy Crush, yeah.
Yeah, you want to play a little bit of it?
If you have it, I don't have it here. But, I can play a bit on the guitar if you want.
Give me some. Yeah, play me a little bit on your guitar.
It's funny, you know, how I'm at home and you would think I would have all the DJ equipment and all the, you know, and all the speakers and I don't have hardly anything. In fact, AWB albums, I really have to buy them, you know, because people come and stay and you give them away, you know, people come and stay with you and they say, well, oh, I love this album. Oh, okay, take it away. So I've actually bought 2 or 3 albums, you know, bought quite a few albums of our own albums, you know, because I didn't have copies. So it goes. That's basically what I play. I mean, you don't get much simpler than that. And then the vocals come in. Put me in the dead. I report to fall. Wait till everybody's gone. And it goes on from there. A lot of people think, you know, they wonder why everything fits together in the band. And we really got a lot of direction from James Brown in that everybody has a part to play. And our original drummer, Robbie McIntyre, was a stickler. He said, don't play anything you don't have to. Find a part and stick to it. Don't change it. As soon as you change it, the bottom drops out of it. So if you think about Pick Up the Pieces, for example, you've got the introductions of that's it for my guitar part, but everyone else has their own parts to play. So the horn players, 2 horn players are playing the melody, and then you've got the chant, Pick Up the Pieces. You've got the, you know, you've got the other guitar part, and the bass parts are very simple. But if you put it all together, it doesn't sound like much when you hear the parts individually. But when you put them all together, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and everything's in its right place. And it's, you know, and that's really the secret behind what makes the band work. Nobody's playing anything too much of what they should. Nobody's playing anything more than they should. And, you know, if you're playing something like, as soon as I stop playing that, it sounds very weird because you miss it. It's, you know, it's a tension thing. You think you can't still be playing that, but you do. And that creates tension because you keep waiting for it to change, but it doesn't really change. Even when it goes to the B section, yeah, I'm still playing. And it fits both parts, you know, so that's got an awful lot to do with finding a simple part and then sticking to it. You don't change it. And I think the best example of that is in 1977, we went to Montreux Jazz Festival and Arif Mardin put together a big band and it was live at Montreux, and we do a version of Pick Up the Pieces where there was like, there must have been 8 or 9 horn players, including Randy Brecker. Michael Brecker plays the most amazing solo. And I'm still playing the same part, you know. But somehow it all works, and then you get this incredible horn arrangement that Arif wrote out, and he gets all these incredible players, you know, all playing solos, but reading the charts and playing the parts where you've got, you know, maybe 6 or 7 horns all playing a melody part, you know, and it's just astounding. So I played it recently, actually. I wish I had a copy to play you, but maybe we can slot it in later or something, you know. But it's called Pick Up the Pieces, but it's live at Montreux Jazz Festival.
You know, what's interesting, Onnie, is that after to have called yourself the Average White Band during at the peak of African American music of being funk and R&B, and that you all came from, as I said earlier, about you come from England, and the most and the members come from
Scotland.
Scotland. And the members come from you come from Scotland, and here you end up in the United States as the Average White Band, and affectionately called AWB.
Yeah.
So you broke up. So I don't know if you want to share what happened, why you broke up in 1983. So you all took a hiatus, and then you regrouped and came back together in 1989. And is that right?
Yeah.
And so you all are still together now, playing when you can after the pandemic.
Well, we were playing up until recently. Actually, believe it or not, we played a show last Friday night. I'm sorry, that'll be a week tonight. A week ago tonight, we played a private party just outside Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has always been a great market for us. We've always been popular there. And we've been playing every year there in Alexandria, which is just outside, it's in Virginia, just outside DC. We've always had a great crowd. I think there was enough interest and people willing to put together a private party almost. So it was a limited ticket event. Everyone was, we followed all the rules, all the 6 feet apart, and everyone wore masks and all that, and everybody paid attention to that, and it came off very well. So far, touch wood, no one's got sick, and if this comes off, I think it was a good experiment to prove that it can be done if you do everything right. If you're very careful and you don't have stupid people all dancing together or getting together in a swimming pool or something. I mean, just obey the rules. It's in your own interest. You don't want to get sick with this thing. What's 183,000 people have died in the States. It's preposterous. But if you can do it right, if you can obey the rules and be sensible about it, then we can still do events like this. So I think the idea is if this comes off and no one gets sick and we prove that it can be done, then there'll be another market for it. So that was the first time we played. Last Friday night was the first time we played since January the 19th. And we had tours. We had a tour of the States, we had a tour of Europe coming up. Last year we played at the Albert Hall. We sold the Albert Hall, SOULD. So it can be done, and we've turned down a lot of work because no one can. You can't risk going to anywhere where people are jammed together. So that's just the way it is until they find a cure or a jag, something to cure it. Then it's going to be a problem. Hopefully they'll come up with something soon.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is let's talk about our mutual friend, Jesse Ray.
Jesse is a character. I mean, he's one of the most. I don't know what to say. I mean, he's the nicest guy you can imagine. He's just a great guy, and he's over his career he's had some really great ideas, and he should be a lot more popular than he is. But he's a real eccentric. I think he's always loved funk music. He followed funk bands I'd never heard of, and some from Dayton, Roger. He was a big fan of Roger Troutman. He was a big fan of the Meters, for example, from New Orleans. Funkadelic, he loved all that stuff. I mean, him and Bernie Worrell did a lot of music together. But he came up with one hit, but it wasn't his hit. He wrote a hit called Inside Out. And he did very well from that, but it wasn't his own, he didn't perform it, but the artist got a hit from it, and it did very well. So, I mean, he's a talented guy, but I never could go. I don't want to say too much because he's just a lovely guy. He's just he's a real character and a good friend. We've known each other for a long time. He's from the same part of Scotland. My parents moved from Glasgow down to the border country, a place called Galashiels, Selkirk, that area. And he's from that. He was brought up there. And so when I moved down there, we hung out together. And that is great. And it's one of these places you can pop in anytime to his house and they'll make you welcome. And, you'll get the fire on, the dogs are running around, and the chickens are running about out the back, and the sheep running about. It's a really beautiful country area, beautiful countryside, lovely.
Well, and I just wanted to go over a little bit about some of the songs you've helped write, and that was Cut the Cake, Love Your Life, Person to Person. Yep. We talked about Pick Up the Pieces. You played me a little. You played me a little Schoolboy Crush. Right. Soul Mine, and Your Love Is a Miracle.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. A lot of the songs that we came up with came from sound checks. You're at sound check and somebody plays something and then someone else plays something and you get a basis for a song. So most of my parts of writing are coming up with a line. For example, if I played Cut the Cake, for example, it's like, cut the cake. So that is my writing contribution to that song. But obviously someone wrote the lyrics, and a lot of the material was written together. Pick Up the Pieces, for example, is a good example of that, because everyone came up with their own parts. The guitar part, the introduction was, it was mine. And Hamish's part was come down very well as well.
One of the things that, as we wind up our interview, and this has been really so informative, tell me, why do you think it's important for us to have the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center, and define what funk is to you?
James Brown. That's it. James Brown is where I started. This album has changed my life. I was about, 17, 18. And after I heard that record, I devoured everything I could get my hands on. If it was American R&B, that was it. I didn't buy any British material apart from maybe one or two songs. Dusty Springfield, who was also actually an beautiful English singer, soulful singer who was signed to Atlantic. So American R&B is an art form, and I think it's very important that it's kept alive. And we do our part. People can make up their own minds whether they think what we do is true R&B or not. It's subjective. It depends on who's listening. But so many people have said that they appreciate and they like what we do, and that's good enough for me. We're playing what we enjoy, and hopefully that comes across. That's it for me. American rhythm and blues music is what I love. That's it.
Thank you. I want to wish you a happy early birthday. Your birthday will be September the 25th. We want to wish you an early happy birthday. Thank you so much, Onnie. This is Rhine McLin, host of the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center's award-winning show, Funk Chronicles. Until the next time, keep it funky.
Keep it funky, keep it funky, keep it funky. Keep it funky.